Well, good morning, just everybody. I've been sold a bit of a pup actually. I've got a turbo laser pointer here and a normal laser pointer. I'm going to be in a bit of a dilemma as to which one to use, but you'll guide me a bit later on. And I do apologise for the first photograph with a picture of me, and that's our chairman, Stephen Billingham. I guess the point here is that these are pictures out of our annual report this year, and as you can see, vaguely we're on a construction site. We've got a lot of these in Anglian's region. We're doing just under 30,000 new connections every year. The pace of housing growth in our region is a very big challenge. I guess the point here is this is very much on our board agenda. How do we actually enable and support sustainable growth? So just a little bit of context about the business, and particularly bringing it back to here in Norfolk. Overall, we've got over 4,000 employees across the region. 500 or so of them are in this region. We've got over 7,000 assets. You can see a lot of them in this region, over 1,300 above ground assets. So that might be water recycling centres, water treatment works, pumping stations and the like. And you can see over the next 5 years, just in Norfolk alone, we're spending something like £570 million. As a company, we're spending typically £500 million a year. A lot of that money is actually going into maintaining our current assets and then providing new assets for growth moving forwards. And you can see across the region we supply services to over 6 million customers, and about 400,000 of them are across Norfolk overall. So there's a bit of context about the business. Sometimes people don't realise where all of our assets are. Most of our assets are under the ground. We've got about 40,000 kilometres of water main and over 70,000 kilometres of sewer. So most of our assets are actually invisible to most people, but they're pretty crucial in moving water and wastewater around. So, a bit of context. I often say our region is a bit of a microcosm for some of the global challenges. So we've been talking a lot about housing. Housing is driven a lot by people wanting fewer numbers of people in houses. It's also driven by population growth, which is a global challenge, as we know. Nobody's mentioned climate change, but for us, climate change is also pivotally important to think about. And particularly climate change and housing growth at the same time do play off each other and pose some particular challenges. Now, the global challenges are caught here in the World Economic Forum, and you can see climate change, water crises on a global level. But when we bring it down locally, we can see the same sort of challenges in the region. Huge increase in the number of people wanting to have houses, move into the region, population growth, but also particular pressures as a result of climate change. And you can see on the slide here some of the responses that how we think about it. There's also a lot of work going on in the water industry, restructuring it, changing the structure of the industry. For those of you who don't know, we opened up as an industry the non-household retail market. So if you're a commercial customer, you can choose your retailer in the water sector these days. So a lot of change going on within the industry itself. So, just coming to the point about climate change, and I often think the best way to describe this is the year of 2012. For those of you who can remember that, 2012 got to about Easter in Anglian's region, and many of our catchments had the driest period of weather for several years. I think we looked at certainly the big catchments we had, 100 years records broken in terms of how dry it had been. And that got us to a point of thinking about, well, what happens if there's a third dry winter? So 2 dry winters beforehand. And we decided that one of the things we would have to do is to impose a hosepipe ban. Never very popular, particularly when you're standing in London talking to the press. So I announced that, talked about what we were doing as a company, talked about the imposition of the whole idea of non-essential use. The next day it started raining, which is sometimes the most useful thing that people think I do. Come and do is talk about hosepipe bans in order to get it to rain. But it started raining. It didn't stop raining, if you remember. We had the wettest summer on record, and I think it's the second wettest year on record. And for me, that's kind of one of the ways of bringing the whole issue of climate change to life. That is the new norm. That's what we can expect. That level of uncertainty is one of the things we have to deal with. So whatever we're talking about in terms of existing development and new development, it isn't just about the growth in population and housing. It's actually how do we make sure that we have sustainable communities which are more resilient, not less resilient, but more resilient to that environment that we're now finding ourselves in. So that's particularly important, and I'll I'll come back to that theme. So we have something called a strategic direction statement. It's a 25-year look forward on all sorts of things that we think are important. And why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant to reinforce the fact we're a long-term business, not short-term business. We're a long-term business. Some of the decisions we have to take have to be taken with a real long-term perspective, and it's at least 25 years. Some of them are out to 50 years. These priorities here reflect actually the priorities in our refreshed strategic direction statement, and you're welcome. It's going through consultation at the moment, so if you want to go on our website and have your four penneth, please do so. But in essence, I hope you can see that some of the themes that come out of here are things that are really pivotal to us and success in this particular region. There's the issue of climate change. There's the issue of responding to growth in a sustainable way. And they're things, our very first strategic direction statement was published in about 2008-9. The whole idea of the challenges of growth, population growth, housing growth, and climate change, and our response and need to be resilient were writ large across that strategic direction statement. You can still see it in the four sort of strategic priorities as we see them in our refreshed strategic direction statement today. So what? The so what is, well, what are the responses? And at a high level, the responses are we have to think about managing demand, and that means we have to have incredibly low levels of leakage. We have to have lots of water efficiency schemes, metering. We have to encourage our customers. It's not by accident we brand and talk about love every drop. It's because we need and recognise some years ago we need to have a different conversation with customers about how they use water and reducing the amount of water they actually use for the benefit of themselves in terms of bills, but also for the benefit of the environment and the sustainability of growth in the region. So that whole issue of management of demand is really important. We need to have very flexible supply systems. We need increasing flexibility to deal with uncertainties as a result of climate change, but also uncertainties as a result of where growth is going to be happening. We need to build systems that enable us to move water around in lots of different ways. And that's involved some quite different thinking about how we as a company engage in long-term water resource management. We have to think about catchments. We have to think very much about how we can manage at a catchment level. And we have to not think about that just from a water company perspective. We have to think about it from all of the players that impact the river catchments. So it's not good enough for us to decide what we do. We have to think about what all the players in there do and think what our role is. That's pretty important. And then when you come to issues like flooding, which is pretty important for resilience, again, it isn't good enough for a water company to do all of those things on its own. In fact, it can't. It has to be an integrated approach across lots and lots of different players. So I guess some of the messages that I'd like to come out in some of the things I'm saying is different ways of thinking about some of the challenges we face. So innovation and the need to collaborate. And I think being here today is really important for us. The reason we are here is we think it's a fantastic opportunity to raise some of the issues and then hopefully continue to foster collaboration, because that's clearly going to deliver the best results for the environment and for our communities and enable that sustainable growth. So what are some of the challenges? And here's the turbo laser pointers now. Which one do you think's the best? That one? It's not that turbo, is it? That one? Can't even see that one. Right. That answers that question, doesn't it? Yeah, so I'll go with the turbo laser pointer. This is work that the New Anglia LEP did, really looking at where the growth was happening in the east of England. And you can see the darker lines here really highlight the railway line through to Cambridge and the A11. So I guess we're pretty familiar with the sort of growth along some of the growth corridors, and we're acutely focused on that and some of the challenges that poses for us. But also you see other things going on, like up in North Norfolk, where actually we've got other issues, sort of population flux. We've got a lot of houses being rented and second holiday homes and the like, and also people, frankly, an ageing population that isn't being replaced. So when we think about growth, of course, we all know in this room it isn't just growth everywhere. It's the patterns of growth which are important, and it isn't like the whole area is growing in that way. Some areas are actually going in the opposite direction. And obviously that's pretty relevant for us to have a clear view on in terms of providing water and wastewater infrastructure. So just to bring it very, very local, and talk about this region. And this is a picture of a scheme we're building at Higham Water Treatment Works here in Norwich. Just to cast back a bit, though, I talked about the need for resilience. I talked earlier on about growth and climate change, meaning we need to build more resilience in what we do. And a good example of that was a few years ago, we built a new water treatment works at Cossey called East Hills to provide water to the city of Norwich. Now, the heart of that was we recognised that there was a lack of resilience in the supply system for the city of Norwich. We were relying on one treatment works at Higham, and we didn't have another treatment works that could supply the volumes that were needed for the city of Norwich. So we built a resilience scheme, so essentially a standby water treatment works. It doesn't operate at full volume all the time, it just literally is trickling there all the time on standby. And that was built particularly to deal with some of the uncertainties we face, to make sure that we've got two big sources of supply for the city of Norwich. So I suppose that's a local example of my words around resilience coming into action here. This scheme, though, is interesting because it brings up some of the issues and some of the challenges we face. So Higham, at the moment, abstracts its water from Cossey. For those of you who know the Cossey pits, it's at that point. That's a point on the Wensum which is predicted to cause problems in terms of over-abstraction. And as a result of our commitment to no deterioration on rivers, we've actually moved, or we're moving as part of this scheme, the abstraction point to Higham itself, a little bit further down the Wensum, which actually ensures that stretch of river between those 2 points isn't impacted by the water we take out. So this is not more water we're taking out. Actually, we're taking out less water from Higham than we ever have, but it's actually the fact that we're still having an impact on that river. That all sounds very easy, but actually taking water straight out of a river for drinking water is quite difficult, particularly if you've got no big storage. So we're having to put in a very sophisticated membrane process to ensure that we can achieve the right quality standards and take water out right the way through the year. And this particular scheme is £37 million. So what it's doing is it will actually give us resilience in terms of being able to take water out of the river all the way through the year. But it's also dealing with the issue of avoiding deterioration on the River Wensum. And that's really important as Norwich starts to grow. Because the one thing that can't happen is you can't have growth and deterioration in the environment. And throughout the company, this is one of the biggest challenges we face because we're having lots of licenses. So we have licenses from the Environment Agency that say how much water we can take out of the environment. Increasing those licenses are shrinking down. So another example in Norfolk would be at Marham, where on the River Nar, our abstraction license there is being reduced by 75%. So having to take out 75% less water out of the river. Now, the reason for all of that is not just because everybody thinks it's a great idea, it's because of protecting particularly chalk-fed rivers and in trying to ensure that we don't in any way damage them moving forwards. What it means for us in terms of supply, though, is we have to think very differently in terms of supply systems. We have to think about that and factor that into our thinking moving forwards. And in that case, it means bringing more water from the west of our region across to the east. The other thing on the slide there, WRE, that's Water Resources East. This comes back to needing to collaborate. So traditionally, water companies, public water supply companies, the way that they think about water resource planning would be, we'll decide what we need for people's drinking water. That's what we'll look after. Farming community, you can decide what you want to do. Environment, well, we'll understand that, but it'll only be built in essentially by the Environment Agency changing our licenses. Other businesses, well, your abstraction's your concern. The problem is the water doesn't know the difference. It doesn't kind of make a decision about who it likes the most. It's just the amount of water is there. So obviously, this needs a more collaborative approach. So this is the first time this has been done in this country. It's never been done on this scale anywhere else in the world. This is Water Resources East is a combined effort to develop what's called a multi-sector water resource plan. So we know how much water is needed for agriculture. So we've built in agricultural trends across the whole of Norfolk, if we took that as an example. What are the various scenarios there? What's the scenario for energy? The water required for energy over the next few years. What's the scenario for water? Other businesses. Put that all into a plan and decide, therefore, what do we need to do with the limited amount of water there, balanced across those pieces. Never been done before, but it's really quite exciting. Now, my colleagues in water resource management planning were very reluctant for me to show you this slide because one I wanted everything on one slide. I said, can you put everything we're thinking about on one slide, please? This is it, and this is where I do need the turbo pointer. So the stage we're at now is we always have 25-year plans for water resources. We're delivering against the one we developed about 5-6 years ago. As a result of Water Resources East, we're developing a new one, and this year is the fundamental year of actually that plan. And on here, essentially, you've got all of the options of things that are being traded off against each other in that particular plan. So it is rather busy, but I'll use my turbo pointer to point out some bits and bobs. So, for example, you've got up here, right up on the Sherwood sandstones, we've got there something called an artificial aquifer recharge system. So that's essentially putting water back underground into the Sherwood sandstone aquifer there, where we can store water. We've got potentially a couple of above-ground surface water reservoirs. Won't necessarily be owned and operated by Anglian. More likely, they'll actually be shared resources with agriculture. We've got over here, as we start looking down at another level, this is representing the fact that we're actually even incorporating farm-level storage for irrigation. Because, of course, when you bring water and think about it as a whole, you have to start thinking about, well, what's the farm-level storage here? You have to integrate that. We've got these little funny curly arrows are reflecting the fact that that's about reuse. So we discharge a lot of water to the sea at the moment, which is wasted. It doesn't benefit the sea, actually. It's not a positive impact to that environment. So actually, what are the opportunities to recycle and bring that back in? And for anybody who's sort of saying, really? Are you sure? This time of year, a lot of the water that's taken in the big rivers in the east of England will be at least 30% final, what you would have referred to previously as final effluent from the sewage treatment works. We call it water from one of our water recycling centres. But just to give you some context. So there are great opportunities there. And there's lots of opportunities to provide interconnections across different parts of the region, and particularly for this presentation, bringing water from the west to the east, which is really important when you have some of the challenges we've got in terms of growth and also the loss of licence moving forwards. So lots of transfers, reservoirs, underground storage in aquifers, water reuse, and lots of those options are being traded off against each other now, but on a cross-sector basis. So just a quick point here. One of the points that we're really keen on as a company is to be ahead of the game and to be trying to shape the agenda. And we can't just shape the agenda in Norfolk or just within the east of England or just within the region that Anglian serves. We have to think on a national basis. And here's some examples of stuff we've been doing in that area. But I guess the one I'd just like to highlight is this one. I'm loving this laser point. It's good, that. I like that. Water Resources Long-Term Planning Framework. What that is we took the lead nationally on saying, actually, we don't know where drought might strike next across the country. It isn't actually terribly sensible just to think about water resources on a purely East Anglian perspective. What we need to think about is, well, what are the potential scenarios across the country in terms of drought, to take that as an example? Because if we understood that, that would help us to build storage and build interconnections with other water companies that best gave us the best ability to manage some of those risks. So that's a really important framework. A lady called Jean Spencer, who was our reg director at Anglian, led that piece of work. And that has now become the basis of DEFRA's guide to our economic regulator, basically setting new standards for resilience to drought and encouraging companies to follow that framework across the piece. So what that really does is give a common set of planning frameworks across all water companies to ensure we think about the water, not just from a local perspective, but also where the opportunities are between companies. Again, that hadn't been done since 1972, I think, was the last time anybody tried to do that. And we led that. And the reason we led it is because, believe it or not, we're in a very dry region. We're growing really, really fast. And actually, it really matters to us to have this result. And then we've talked about Holland a number of times, so I won't labour the point, but we took a study trip over to Holland to go and look at how do you enable sustainable growth. And I'd echo a lot of the comments that I made before about the opportunities and choice that people have in Holland in terms of what houses they live in. It really is quite marvellous. We particularly went there looking at some of the challenges around flooding, because the Dutch know a thing or two about that. And we came away, I don't think we came away with anything that sort of said, here's a blueprint you can follow, but we did come away with some really interesting ideas, things that challenged our way of thinking traditionally. And that comes back to this innovation. We have to, not just about collaboration, we have to think about innovation, different ways of doing stuff. And they certainly seeded lots of ideas about how you might develop towns, how you might integrate water and town planning in order to achieve lots of things, particularly in terms of surface water drainage, and how you can make a real benefit as a result of doing that. And there were loads and loads of examples, too countless to mention, but the collaboration that took place at a community level in deciding what communities wanted was pivotal. So, you know, in various places, we went to a place where there was a water square in the centre. And what this water square was sort of a little amphitheatre, fantastic for putting on plays and productions and all the rest of it. What it actually was surface water attenuation for one scenario that could happen every couple of years. It would actually hold water. Everybody knew what it was there for. Absolutely brilliant. And there were just so many examples of this different thinking that really brought it to light. The particular relevance for us, though, was thinking about some of the challenges we face in terms of growth. And this is an example, Wisbech, and we've been working with many partners and Fenland District Council leading on this in thinking about how we can get the garden town concept across for Wisbech. And essentially, is there an opportunity to better integrate water planning with town planning there? And to give you a very simple example of this, on the right-hand side, there's something called a map table. This is something we discovered when we were in Holland. And essentially, they said, you're thinking about flood risk management in a completely the wrong way. So for those of you who don't know Wisbech, one of the big issues there is there's a 1 in 200 year flood wall. Thou shalt not build on the other side of a flood defence, which is designed to stop tidal flooding on the River Nene coming in and submerging houses. Thou shalt not. That's what's written. What became out of this work was saying, well, let's just think about that. Is there a way we could demonstrate and build this so that actually you could? And this piece of work here is about, it's run by a very sophisticated model. And essentially, it's a table which you get communities around and you help design essentially the town you want. So you design where your flood-resistant houses are going to be. You design where your roads are going to raise up. You design where actually you're going to manage a breach from a flood defence. All of that stuff. But you engage not only the people who are into flood defence and town planning and road planning and all the rest of it, you engage the people who are going to live there. It's really, really powerful. And underlying it, one of the fundamental bits, which is this different thinking, the modelling, looks not just at what areas go blue. So if you look at our flood modelling at the moment, it's just what areas go blue. What areas go blue matters, of course, but how they go blue matters even more. So any of you who've been involved in a big flood will know the power of a flood is a really important thing to understand. How deep is it going to go and how powerful is it going to be? Now that model brings that to life. So you don't just look at areas that go blue, you understand how they go blue, and therefore you can build, in this place, the garden town with that in mind. So for us as a role, you know, I said we're pro-sustainable growth. We really do want to be right at the heart of this growth agenda. We want to be seen as a trusted partner. It's pivotally important to us. We want to be involved right at the outset. If we're involved right at the outset, we can ensure we get the infrastructure in. We can ensure it's built into our business planning process. We can ensure that we get the right things in when they're needed. And hopefully we can be of an influence in terms of getting genuinely sustainable towns. One of the ways we're trying to do that, we call these our sort of growth roadshows. We've held one in Norfolk already. We're going to do these throughout the region. Just trying to get the right cast of characters together to talk about what are some of the issues. Not just in terms of planning, but also in delivery. So we understand what it is that sometimes we're doing inadvertently, which are not helping the process. So we have very open and honest conversations. And Norfolk was the first one. And I have to say it's been really, really positive. And this is just what went on the wall during the session. But we'll carry on with that. We really want that series to become something about how we do business and to give a focal point for communication. And we're really, really keen, particularly to bring other utilities into that. And a big message from Norfolk was, particularly in terms of growth, was how can we bring power into this same discussion? And that's an action that we took away. So, just finishing with a quote from Charles Darwin, lest anybody thinks anything's new. He talked about the importance of collaboration. He talked about the importance of improvisation, innovation. They remain important. They're sort of fundamental themes within our business. I think they're as important today as they always were, but sometimes we lose our way along the way. But today, I think, is a great step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was amazing to see lots of intriguing design challenges in the water industry and some really, really interesting ways of solving them.